Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Four Mothers of Women's Spirituality Online Resource Center. I'm your hostess, Vajra, and I'm the curator of the Resource Center. Today, we're going to be speaking with Star Goode. Before we begin, I'd like to give a little context to our discussion and let you know that women's spirituality emerged as a major component of what's known as the second wave of women's liberation. And this emergence took place in the 1970s and 1980s. But a lot of people today don't know about the Four Mothers of Women's Spirituality, these women who were so courageous and radical, and by radical I mean to the root, these women who developed authentic spiritual experiences and practices beyond the boundaries of patriarchal religion. These feminists followed their passion and their convictions, and they built upon a growing scholarly body of historical knowledge, and sometimes bringing through intact indigenous traditions to connect with the nature and female-honoring spirituality that preceded the past 6,000 to 10,000 years of the patriarchal father gods. These four mothers that we'll be speaking with in this series, along with many other feminists, pioneered a diverse spiritual orientation that is based in respect, reverence, and relationship with all. These four mothers are not only historically significant, but many are continuing their vital work today, as is Star Goode. And that is why this resource center was created. So we can provide an historical overview via personal testimonies and the four mothers' recollections of the formative first 2 decades of women's spirituality, and to learn about the presence of their ongoing work today. So we invite you to meet these women today, Star Goode, now in the form of taped interviews with additional interviews and resources to be expanded as time goes on. And today, speaking with Star Goode, we are in the year 2018. And before I say hello to Star, I'd like to read her biography. Star Goode teaches literature at Santa Monica College in California. She is the producer and moderator of the cable TV series, The Goddess in Art. And those programs are now housed in the permanent collection of the Getty Museum, and they're also available on YouTube. She's also a recipient of the Henri Colette Memorial Poetry Award from the Academy of American Poets. She's been profiled for her work as a cultural commentator in the LA Weekly, the Los Angeles Times, the Wall Street Journal, and the New Yorker. Her latest essay, entitled Adventures She Has Brought My Way, appears in the anthology Four Mothers of the Women's Spirituality Movement, Elders and Visionaries. Her latest book, and opus major, I would say, is Sheila Nagig, The Dark Goddess of Sacred Power. Her book won she, as the author, won the 2018 Sarasvati Award for Best Nonfiction Book. This award was presented to her by the Association for the Study of Women and Ethology. Star Goode, welcome. I'm so delighted to have you here today.
Thank you. It's a delight to be here and talking with you.
I would like to start by asking you, going way back into the 70s, what was it like to start the first underground feminist newspaper called It Ain't Me, Babe? Would you tell us about that?
Yes, it was wonderful. It was thrilling. You know, we just hit on the 50-year anniversary of 1968, that tumultuous time with the assassinations of Robert Kennedy and Martin Luther King, and the country being in tatters, all aflame with the Vietnam War. I tell my students, remember, there was a draft then. Young men were being sent away, and I crossed from my little town of Millbrae across the Bay Bridge, and I went to Berkeley, and I found my home there. I found the true place. I found the world where I belonged, and I entered a CR, or consciousness-raising group, a very simple thing, a circle of women who talked with each other. And I loved what you said about radical being down to the roots, and that's what we did. And from there, I met a woman and who knew another woman who had a press, and we started that collective. And I felt that it was the revolution. I mean, I felt, and it's something that I feel right now, too, that same sort of thrill of change in the air, even though these are dire times, and of course those were dire times, but it was the idea that these institutions that had been oppressing us, and suddenly the veil was rent, and I saw where I belonged, and I saw my malaise and my suffering, and the truth of what was in my heart and my soul of the female, of feminism, and it was such a deliverance, and it was very exciting because we started the newspaper. Our first issue was in January 1970, and it was a picture of women were storming Harmon Gym on the UC campus, demanding that we be allowed to take karate classes so we could defend ourselves against rape, which of course circles back to the Me Too movement right now. And it was so, it's wonderful to be young, but it was so exciting and bliss to be young at that dawn of something new. And we had such hopes of, it felt like the revolution. There were soldiers in the street, and in Berkeley, I feel like I lived through a war, it was tear gas, and a student got killed, and, it was, people were getting mass arrests. But it was this idea of a tremendous hope and change, and the fact that we were taking actions and being creative and writing the newspaper and connecting with all these wonderful women and sending the newspaper out all over the country. And in those days, we would lay out the newspaper in our dining room. We would paste and glue and lay it all out. So it was a different era. But in terms of change in the air, it feels like now. It feels like now to me.
It feels like now, you mean in the sense that something new is starting here?
Yes, I feel like this movement now of this reclamation of the vulva, this reclamation of using words like vagina and vulva and pussy, we've reclaimed that word, that something's afoot that's stirring the consciousness of our times, even though the world is brutal and it's very terrifying, what is happening to our democracy. Still, at the same time, there's something afoot that's moving women and reclaiming the power of their own bodies and the sanctity of their bodies. So it does remind me of those thrilling, heady times of Berkeley in the 60s and 70s.
Yeah. Well, definitely something was really stirred deeply in women globally when Trump was elected, the pussy grabber, as he is known, and women the next day started organizing the Women's March that became global. That is definitely something stirring at a very deep level, and then now the Me Too movement. So it's as if we're coming into another place on the spiral that you were part of back in the 70s. That's how it feels to me, too, definitely.
Yes, and it's so wonderful to see these younger women, and of course the lineage of what we've been doing all these decades, to see it coming around. And it was so thrilling at that time and exciting and fiery. We were in the flames of change, and I feel that now, too.
You, back in the 1985 series you did of Goddess in Art, the cable series, I'd love to hear about that. And what did you try to achieve for that? And I think part of that also was the Sheila and the Gig, and why there's such a popular interest in her today. Those are connected, I believe.
Well, let me unpack that a little bit.
Okay.
My first show was January 1986, but what happened was my friend, who was the president of Artists Equity Guild, was doing a TV show called The Goddess in Contemporary Art, and the woman who was supposed to moderate it was in a car accident, and so he asked me. And I said, okay, I can do that, and I interviewed two artists, Anna Homler and Betsy Richardson. Anna Homler, the bread woman, if people know of her. And after it was, and it was very exciting and scary because I had never done anything on TV like that. And then afterwards I thought, I could just do this myself. And so I started doing the Goddess in Art. And it was a way for me to meet with all these wonderful women, and I did interview 2 men, all these wonderful people who were doing this, artists and scholars who were doing this incredible work, and it was a way I could go up to them, and I had a format with which I could have a conversation. And for me, conversations are a supreme experience, and it was a way for me to connect with them and show their work and talk and put this work out, because the Goddess is the oldest tradition in art. It is the foundation of art and spirituality. I mean, the Goddess is the first beginnings of all these traditions over the millennia. That's not just what I think. It's true, and it's certainly evidenced in the archaeological record. And so it was a way for me to do that. And it was a way for me to meet Maria Gimbutas, which she was giving a talk at UCLA, and I could go up to her and say, I've got a TV show. Can I interview you? And she said, sure. It was funny because I wanted to interview, I was working with Joan Sutherland, who was helping her edit the language of the Goddess. At that time of her great trilogy, Only Goddesses and Gods of Old Europe had been published. And I said, well, we can talk with you. I can talk with you and Joan. And Maria said, we don't need Joan. Just talk to me. So,
all right. Oh, very good.
You don't need her. And so I got to meet Maria, which, of course, was life-changing for me.
Yeah.
And for all of us.
Yeah.
One of the great figures of the 20th century.
Yes, she is. She is. And she really helped bring through the reality that the Goddess, as you said, was the origin of all the current traditions, spiritual traditions. And most people, I think, Star, still don't know that. That's still not common knowledge.
It's not common, but, things, artists and scholars, things begin in dreams, and they begin on the edge and then move inward, and it's in the air, and she certainly gave us a foundation from which to rise, that it's not a fantasy. As she said in one of her late talks, my work is not a novel. My books are not novels, and they're not.
Mm-hmm. No, Mary Mackey did that. I interviewed her last week. Yeah, and she made novels out of them. And Maria Gimbutas gave her good housekeeping seal of approval, so to speak, that they are accurate and really bring alive the reality of
They're wonderful. I love
Europe.
reading them. I love reading her books. They're
fabulous, yeah. And then that was around the Goddess and Art series. That was around the time that you did the L.A. Festival, Goddess and Art, right?
Festival. I started the TV show in January 1986, the day after the Challenger exploded. I marked that in my head. And then I started with 2 friends of mine, Charles Sherman and Nancy Ann Jones, Goddess Project LA, and I think that's when I first met you in the late 80s. We started, we did this month-long arts festival. Is 88 or I think it was 88 or 87, and I had been introduced to the Sheilas by then, and I had an interest in them, and we organized that, and it was the first month-long art festival of the Goddess in the country, and it was a tremendous success. We had venues all over the city. We had rituals. We had TV shows. We had art exhibitions. We had poetry readings. We had lectures. The late Eleanor Dayton came down and gave a lecture too, and so it was quite.
It was
exciting.
Fabulous. It was phenomenal. It was very exciting. I remember it well, and I want to thank you for that. It was it was stunning. It was glorious. We've mentioned the Sheila Nagig, and I think a lot of people don't know what that is. Would you explain to us what the Sheila Nagig is, and how it gives us a new view of the feminine in Western culture?
Sure. Sheila Nagigs are stone carvings of women exposing their vulvas on medieval churches between the 12th and 17th century. So they are on Christian Catholic churches. And at first they were on churches, and then they were on castles and became on holy wells, they on walls, on castles, And so they moved from sacred to secular architecture. And the question is what are these supernatural figures of women exposing these huge vulvas? What are they doing on these Christian churches? And they're very fierce looking. They have vulvas, which of course all women have, but they're can be half the size of their body. So they're really not ordinary women. They're goddesses. They're supernatural women. And yet that figure, that vulva, is centered in the dry body of a crone. So she's an antinomy. She incorporates the wholeness of nature. She has life and death all in this one figure. She can have a skull of death. She has very bony ribs. And yet some Sheilas are pregnant looking. One Sheila even holds a baby. So what are they doing up there? And that was a mystery. Plus, their images, they're very mesmerizing images. One of the sections in my book, the last section of the book, is about image, and I talk about the imagination because I think that's the formative quality of life. And the Sheilas are pieces of art, and they're very fierce, primal works with a tremendous image that can liberate us, really.
Mm. Elaborate on that, would you? It really is amazing that these are on Christian churches. People
Right.
don't know that either. And what does that say about what came through in the human consciousness, even through Christianity, that is now so demonized, right? People would think that's vulgar or that's pornographic. They wouldn't understand it. How would you elaborate on how that image can be liberating?
Well, I want to say that Christianity is, the history of Europe, the cultural and political history of Europe. It doesn't begin with Christianity. It's not a tabula rasa. We have a thread of millennia going back to these goddess traditions. So, of course, it's not surprising that such supernatural females would appear on architecture because that's really our true history, and it's still part in the consciousness and the psyches of the populace and the people. So the Sheilas are just part of an ongoing tradition, and it couldn't be wiped out at the time of one of the lowest points in the race of women of the witch burnings. It's sort of miraculous in a way that these figures existed and were created. So they were tolerated by the church as a way of bringing the pagans in. The first Sheila I ever saw was walking up the road, and this worker in the road said, "Oh, are you going to see our Sheila?" I said, "Yeah." And he said, "The Christians put her in to bring in the pagans." So I thought, here's this worker in the road, and he knows. So this is a powerful image. We have this crisis in our culture right now, which is a fundamental crisis, which is the kind of images that we're being fed, these superficial media conglomerates feed us these spectacles of illusion that aren't images that connect, aren't sacred, and they don't connect us to the deepest, most transformative parts of ourselves. We're being entertained to death with such images that do not feed us but are actually quite patriarchal toxicity. So the Sheila is an image that bursts forth, that is whole, that is nurturing, that can transform us and heal us. So she's a cosmological image from one of the deepest parts of ourselves. So that's one of the reasons then that I talk about the imagination, because the imagination is probably the greatest force of evolution. So it's important. Human beings deal in images. We have images may be the oldest way, images and symbols may be the oldest way that we deal with reality. It's not just chains of cause and effect and reason, which has its place, but doesn't connect us to the forces of life the way the imagination does. So in that way, I see the Sheila as very healing, because she connects us to that she's an image of wholeness. She connects us to the deepest roots of ourselves, and she gives women a sense of dominion and power over their own body, and that she, by exposing her sacred vulva, she is committing a sacred act, not a demonic act, and that's one of the things, of course, that women are doing now is reclaiming the powers of their own body. And the Sheila Gig, much as I like images of Virgin Mary and I'm all for love and nurturance, but the Sheila is not asking permission to exist. She's there, and she's powerful. And even though she has many qualities and protective qualities and nurturing qualities too, but she is the powers of life and death. And so this image gives us what we need. It gives us a dominion over our body. It connects us to the deepest parts of ourselves, and it is nurturing and revelatory of the powers of the imagination, because cosmological images legitimate political systems. Right now, well, as you know, we live in patriarchal violence that we're saturated in, and we live under a war god. But the Sheila is an image of a creativity that if we all come from the womb of the goddess, then we're all connected, and the world is a place of, we each have our own measure and our own right to live, and that that the world is something to be experienced in the rapture of life, not to be exploited in the natural world. So the Sheila gives us all of that. And she's a complete image for our time.
She is. She is. Very paradigm busting of the patriarchal derogatory view of the female body and the demonization of the female body, the trivialization of women's bodily processes. You did a lot of research over the years. This has been a decades-long work for you. Would you tell us about how you researched the Sheila Gig and how you developed material for the book?
Sure. In the mid-'80s, around the time I was starting the TV show, a friend of mine was doing a paper. Actually, she was in a class for our friend Miriam Robbins Dexter, and she showed me this image of the Sheila Gig, and she had a Xerox copy of a book called The Witch on the Wall by Jorgen Andersen, which was the first modern book on Sheilas. And she showed me this image, and she said, "I think you'll like this." And for me, it was love at first sight. I was mesmerized. What is this image? I mean, they are fierce images, and sometimes people think they're demonic or that they're really frightening. But for me, I was just completely engulfed. I was just completely taken in and saturated in my being by this power for them. In a way, it was like when I went to Berkeley and found this world where I belonged. I mean, I felt like such a connection to them. So I read that book, and I started doing research, and I started going to Ireland. And at that time, I looked, and at the back of his book, Jorgen Andersen's book, was a 30-year-old, 50-year-old map from a great scholar, Dr. Edith Guest, a woman scholar from the 30s, who had made a list of the Sheilas with the Royal Archaeological Society. And so I was just following that trail. Now there are maps like by the great Jack Robertson. You can just find this and find that. But at that time, it could be a day to track down a Sheila, and I just started tracking them down. It was an inner mandate. It was a call. Sometimes we are lucky and find our path and have a call, and that's what it was for me. It was a call, and that mandate sustained me in the years of working, and when we have our doubts and fears about what we're doing. And it was a mandate that I was serving the Sheilas, and that the Sheilas are with me, and that they carry me along. They've carried me on this journey. So I started going around and doing research, and at that time taking slides, if you can imagine, taking pictures and images, and having these adventures of the Sheilas, which are in the British Isles in Ireland, many more in Ireland. And I did that, and then I got asked to give talks, and I started doing talks and then writing papers, and it just began to accumulate. But the basis of all of it is a love, is a calling, and that's that sustained me and gave me energy and excitement and inspiration. And that's what it is. It's a love affair, Vajra.
It is. It is. And you've expressed it so beautifully in your book, Sheila and the Gig.
Thank you.
It's a gorgeous book, and it opens up a view, this sacred view of the wholeness of the female and of humanity, this connection to life and death, no separation. I just really want to encourage the listeners to take advantage of this work that you have created and brought to us. And when someone loves something the way that you do and does that visceral research, that tracking it down, as you said, live, not just on the internet. That wasn't happening back then.
No.
That comes through. That comes through, that passion and that love. I'm really kind of mesmerized by your mesmerization when you first saw that image, how it struck you at a very deep level beyond words. Can you make it clearer to the listeners how she is a symbol of wholeness, both life and death?
Sure. I want to say that because I know the power of images and the power of symbols and the power of such things, that I want to say, and I'm happy to explain and talk, because what's better than talking about Sheila and the Gigs on a Friday morning in May? But I also want to say that there's a mystery, too. Because it's the power of the image, it's not something where the last word can ever be said. Because when you have an image, there's kind of like an eternity or an infinitude to them, too. So I will never completely unravel, nor do I wish that, all the mysteries of the Sheila and all the mysteries of that image. And that's part of its sacredness. All I can say is it penetrated my being. I felt vivified. I felt it in the cells of my body. I knew that I just was taken away. I was swept away. That, and it's a grand experience, and may it happen to everyone. It was a wonderful, life-enhancing, rapturous experience, and that's how the Sheilas were for me. What's the question, Vajra?
Well, she's being a symbol of wholeness. How is she
okay.
Yeah, a symbol of life and death.
Okay. Maria Gimbutas, in her great works, said that Sheilas, she said that the life giver and death wielder were really one deity in the archaeological record, and she called them the magician mothers. I just gave a talk on this, the magician mothers. And I really love that, because that was like the Sheilas. She's part of, and then Maria, of course, had many examples through prehistory and history, which I do in my book, too. I talk about the Sheilas, and then I also talk about the worldwide connection of all the such display figures, which, even though they're different in their iconography, have very similar functions. So that she has that if death happens, then life begins right away. That these are, again, the magician mothers, and the Sheila is a magician mother because she has the wholeness of destruction and creativity in her body. Of course, the vulva is the sine qua non of creativity. It's the most foundational image we have of creativity. And I say this a lot, and it got me kicked off the Sheila page of Wikipedia, but I say it anyway. The vulva is the cosmological center of the human imagination, because it's the earliest image of creativity, the most enduring image of creativity, and that's the basis of the Sheila's power, is her vulva. And we see that in throughout history and throughout time and cross-culturally. Anyway, the Sheilas, they have these tremendous vulvas, or I can use the word pudendum, which means shame, but she doesn't have shame about her vulva. She's fierce, she's bold. So she has her vulva, which of course is that image of creativity, which is the source of life. We all come into life through the vulva. I mean, now we have cesarean sections, but essentially that's our entrance into life. And it's also an image, of course, of sexuality, and we are buried in Mother Earth as, you know, the womb of Mother. So she has that creativity, and the Sheilas are, their vulvas are tumescent. The lips are swollen, like in sexual excitement. So, you know, they're very excited, aroused is the word, genitalia. That's what she has, and many of them have quite big clitorises. So we have that image of fecundity and sexuality. So we have that, and yet she is, and that they, to keep on the creativity side of it, many of them were used as birthing icons, and they were used to help women, mothers in need, through their parturition, through birth. They were used to help women with that, and Barbara Freitag, in her book on the Sheilas, talks about the Sheilas as being icons not just of human fertility, and Maria makes this point too, but the life force of all life, of all, you know, creativity, of all of the cosmos. And certainly in many traditions, women walk through the fields and let their menstrual bloods come onto the fields. And so this is a power of the Sheila. And the image of the vulva is the quintessence of the ever-renewing life force, ever-renewing. So that is the image of the life force, again, not just birthing babies, but all of life. So that is one of the qualities of the Sheila. And as I said before, some of them have pregnant bellies, and one, the Sheila on an island in the Hebrides, holds a little baby. So she has that quality. But then she also has, again, the body of a crone. She has withered paps. She has, although some of the Sheilas have breasts, but basically it's a fierceness in her face. Many of them are skull-like. They have emaciated ribs. She's a crone. So what is this, you know, tumescent, ripe vulva doing in the body of the crone? Because she has the wholeness of all of life. And as I mentioned before, Sheilas are often on churches overlooking graveyards. It's like she's overlooking the dead. Sometimes she's on tombstones. She's on the funerary monument of Bishop Wellesley in the church of the Cathedral of Kildare. There's a Sheila actually on his monument. There's a Sheila in England and Shropshire that overlooks the corpse store where the corpses were brought in. So she has many connections with the dead too. And so we see this integration of opposites, the wholeness, and that gives us a feeling of being alive because it touches on the experience of being alive, the wholeness of our experience, which is, you know, coming into being, living, passing away, and the Sheila touches on all of that.
As you're speaking, I'm really getting the understanding that, excuse me, that when we're born, of course, we come into this world through the vulva. When we die, we go through the vulva into, you know, death is a passageway into another life. So again, we're passing through the vulva, the Sheila Nagigs vulva. Either way, you're dying to one world and being born into another, whether you're being born into this world or you're dying from this world. And
I love that.
That's what I'm getting very strongly as you're talking. My own.
I'm going to quote you. I love that. Because the Sheilas are liminal figures. I love that word liminal, the boundary, the edge, because the vulva is a boundary between inside and out. And when in some Sheilas, and the Sheilas are placed by entrances, and of course the vulva is an entrance and an exit through birth, and Sheilas are placed by doors and by windows and to protect the who's coming into the church or the buildings. So they are quite liminal figures that you have to pass through her legs to enter entered a church, which of course is, if you're going into a church, that's a change of consciousness too, sacred space. So they are quite liminal figures in that way, crossing the borders, the boundaries of inside of out, of life and death, of different states of being, this world, the world of the beyond. So I think you've really caught that, and that is one of the, to me, one of her greatest powers is the power of apotropeia, or protectiveness, that the Sheilas have a quite intense protective power. They protect buildings, they protect life, they protect mothers. They have so many functions. And again, just as I was saying that there's a mysterious quality and the last word can't be said, there's no last word to be said on all her powers. She has powers of healing, which I'll touch upon in a minute. But this apotropaic power, and that can be seen in so many of the figures all over the world, of the Gorgons, of Kali. Kali is destructive, but Kali is also Kali Ma. She's the mother of Dulakai, figures in Oceania, just all over the world, that the Sheilas have that quality of protectiveness. And in the Middle Ages, there was these called body badges, body in the sense of sexual, B-A-W-D-Y, of just pilgrims would wear them, and it was just a walking vulva, much like the Balbo figures in Preen. And they would use them to protect themselves against the evil eye, because it was thought that the plague could be, not Holocaust, the plague, the Black Plague, the bubonic plague, could be caught through eye contact. So people would wear these icons of the vulva, and they were called pudendum pilgrims. They would be, said they would wear those badges. So I say that because sometimes there are Christian scholars who just feel the Sheilas are images of lust and sin and evilness, because are women the fall of all humanity, or are they our redemption in a way, or a regeneration? So the idea that the Sheilas and that the vulva is a healing quality, it has a healing power. And I say all this because of all the research I've done of figures all over the world, but also that if you go back to the Paleolithic caves, in one of the earliest caves, the Chauvet Cave, discovered in 1994, then it was discovered, there was a rock slide and it was hidden, and then they discovered it. And in
southern France, right?
That's in southern France, with all the Chauvet Cave, with all those wonderful monuments of magnificence, all the Paleolithic caves in France and Spain, and actually throughout Europe, but mainly in that not throughout, but in parts of Europe. So in the Salle du Fond, the last chamber is a vulva, and it guards an entrance. And there's 4 other vulvas, and each vulva in that cave is watching over an entrance. Each vulva, 38,000 years ago. So it shows that this quality of apotropeia and protecting entrances and watching things is there from the beginnings of culture, is there from the beginnings of art. And I read this in the International Newsletter of Rock Art. I didn't read this in Go Goddess Go. It was... So that was one of my most thrilling days as a scholar, to read that this foundational quality of the vulva as a protective quality is there from the beginning.
And we also see the downward pointing triangle representing the vulva in East Indian, goddesses and iconography, in the Sri Yantra, which is a series of multiple triangles pointing up and down, which signifies energy in the human body and the cosmological energy of creation itself. Again, it's the pudendum shape, the downward pointing triangle. So the vulva is worldwide, of course.
Absolutely. And we see that in the Indian art and the yantras of the downward pointing triangle. And actually, that has been, what do I want to say, not ritualized, but concretized in textiles all over the world. The lozenge, which we see in many figures, like in the African guardian figures, the Gabon and doors, they guard granary huts and sacred objects, that lozenge is really a double triangle, that we see that concretized in textiles all over the world, which Elizabeth Barber in her work about woman's work and cloth, a great work that she talks about that, and she makes the point that it shows the ontological primacy of the vulva, of the downward pointing triangle. So she shows that this is a timeless pattern of energy that's in our psyches. This is not just something that this culture got it and that culture got it. It's something deep in the deepest parts of ourselves. And I bring up in my book the Bloemboss Caves, which are in South Africa, that there are lozenges there, the double triangle, 80,000 years old, these carvings. There you go.
There you go. There you go. From Africa to old Europe to India and Australia. Aren't there images of equivalent to the Shinanigig in Australia?
Yeah, every continent. I don't know about the North and South Pole, maybe not, but every continent. In Australia, there's many figures like the Carnarvon Gorge, which Glennis Livingston was about to go visit, our comrade. They have, it's called the Wall of 1,000 Vulvas. You know that there's. I have that in my book. There's imagery of in different rock art, because there's a tremendous tradition of rock art there in Australia of creatrix figures with vulvas. It's in Australia. It's in Oceania, the Dulukai, which I mentioned, who has a huge vulva and clitoris, and she's in many ceremonial huts, and Kali and figures in China, the stones in Ecuador, in the Manabi culture, there's standing stones with carvings of figures on them. The Taino Indians, who had the malefic fate to be the first Indians, was in Puerto Rico that Columbus connected with. And they have these traditions of, even now it still exists, stone circles with Atabi, who's looks like a Sheila, a crouching, figure in that frog goddess posture with vulvas. It's all over. It's all over.
Thank you for painting that picture.
Okay, which picture?
I was saying thank you for painting that picture of its global presence and naming all the different places.
Sure. Why? Because it's a timeless pattern of energy inside us.
Yes.
That, and it's in our deepest parts of ourselves, and it's in our five senses and in our instinctual nature. It's in the outer world and it's in the inner world. And that's why it's an image of wholeness.
Yeah. And to emphasize that it's in the female body particularly. Of course, the vulva is distinctly female.
Yes, it is.
Let's not forget that. And
let's not forget that. Let's not erase femaleness.
No, let's not. And it's happening in various ways in the culture. We won't go into that now, but it is really important to revive this visceral, direct connection to these cosmological patterns of energy that are encoded into our bodies, and particularly represented in the female body with the vulva and the womb. And I think our best counter to the erasure of the female that's happening in so many ways, the brutalization and exploitation and rape of the female, the best way to counter that is to revive this deep connection of sacred connection with the vulva. And that's why I appreciate your book so much and your work so much, Star.
Thank you. Well said. I like to think that my book came out at just the right time, again, to offer a foundation for what's happening, what's stirring in our consciousness, what's stirring in the zeitgeist of what's returned, the return of the goddess, which is so necessary for the sheer survival of life, that it shows, again, this not demonic disgusting qualities, but life. And that's what's so exciting about women reclaiming their bodies and loving their bodies and loving the vulvas, this image of power. And I don't know if you know the Pussy Church and just different pussy collectives and just different things, just talking about all the different kinds of vaginas, or, of course, Eve Ensler's vagina monologues, and a really great genius work of art, The Dinner Party.
Oh, yeah.
When
Judy Chicago did The Dinner Party, when she started researching, she wanted to do research on, birthing as a sacred thing, and she went to the library. There was nothing. There was nothing
right.
about birth being sacred.
No.
She was floored. So she brought that through with The Dinner Party and the Birth Project, those two tremendous. Now, you mentioned the Pussy something.
Pussy Collective.
Before you, the Pussy Collective?
Church. Yeah. It's a woman, Sierra Sullivan, who I've been in touch with, and she does a lot of work around that in circles with women. I mean, there's so many things, the Vagenda, it's in the air, and we might not know everyone. Not everybody might be as well known as the Vagina Monologues or the Dinner Party, but there's a lot of things rising from the ground all over. And this is someone. She lives in L.A. Who's doing this work.
This brings up why it's so important for women to get together, as you did, how exciting it was back in the 70s and the 80s when, you were face-to-face. It wasn't done necessarily through the Internet. That Internet wasn't happening then. And the consciousness-raising groups, the CR groups, and as Gloria Steinem saying recently, a few years ago, how the next step for feminism, what needs to happen is for women to come back together face-to-face, eye-to-eye.
Lovely. Lovely.
Yeah. And we need that, and it sounds like that's what's happening with the Pussy Agenda and all of that. That's
right. To sit in a circle, to talk or do ritual, there's nothing more powerful than that.
Yeah.
And that's just available to any of us.
Yeah.
So I think, for me, again, hoping that I was just writing something, the title of this new talk I'm putting together, The Icon of the Vulva, a Basis for Civilization, because I think the vulva is the basis of civilization.
Yes. Yeah.
Isn't that a talk you'd like to hear?
I'm ready. Let me know when you're doing it.
Okay. Because that's how powerful it is. That's how pervasive it is. That's how foundational it is, with a celebration. And that this was, again, the quintessential image of creativity and the imagination throughout history and prehistory and our civilization. And now that's what's afoot now, is this reclaiming the sacredness of it, reclaiming the sacredness and the power of it. It's just, I don't know, for me, I just feel so part of the spirit of the times, and just wanting to serve the Sheilas and wanting to serve the Great Mother and the Great Goddess, and it's so part of it, and so that women can feel what they intuitively feel now, and wiping away the shame, and what they can intuitively feel in power and honor and love their bodies and their vulva. And I mean, it is so, I don't need to tell you because of all your work, but, it's such a source of and foundation of energy and power and delight, and that, but that they can know that this is an intuitive quality right now that's rising with our intuition, which is our connection to the goddess, but that is true throughout history.
What we need is not slut walks. We need Sheila Nagig walks.
There you go.
Marching down the street with big banners of Sheila Nagigs. Why not?
There you go. When I gave this talk in Las Vegas at the Association for Study of Women Mythology, a woman said to me, "We need Sheila Nagigs in every school." I said, "Okay."
Yes. Absolutely.
And again,
because what's missing is the sense of wonder. With all the pornification of the female body, the sense of wonder that struck you, and you first saw your image of Sheila Nagig, that sense of wonder at the process of life, the mystery of life, the power of life. And the other thing that comes to me is that I often speak of the vulva and the womb. They are the fountain of not just power, creative power, but of pleasure. That they're wedded together. They come from come from the same fountain, power and pleasure. And pleasure's been, hedonized and diminished, but real pleasure comes from a sense of wonder and wholeness and aliveness. That's real pleasure.
I love that. Wasn't the goddess clever to put those together?
She was very clever.
To put together the regeneration and renewal of life with such pleasure, that it would be such a supreme pleasure. And yes, let's not, of course, I mean, this is the vulva as this denigration of this, as a source of evil, the source of all evil, instead of the source of all delight.
Well, that's the patriarchal reversal, isn't it? Everything, as Mary Daly said, the great reversal. There you have it. Yeah.
And even though, we have this pornographic culture and we're so bombarded with these images of sexuality, but it's just, again, it's a spectacle of illusion. It's degraded. It's not connected to the wonder and wholeness of everything, of life and delight. It's so, as you said, degraded. And
a research.
And the Sheilas are so.
Go ahead.
I was just saying, I've been so moved by the beauty of the Sheilas, because beauty isn't just, good makeup and an eyebrow arch or something. Beauty is power and connection to the deepest forces of life. Yes. And the Sheilas do that for us. The Sheilas give us that. And that's part of their sway and incredible beauty. And I wanted to touch upon, too, this resurgence. One of the things that's so interesting now is more Sheilas are being discovered. And the Sheila that's on the cover of my book, the Vajra Sheila, that was discovered in 1994 when they were doing a cleanup of the church, and they lifted up the stone, and there she was. That picture was taken right after they found the Sheila. And there's that where they've been hidden or, buried in castles in the basement. But they're also discovering Sheilas that are on walls that were there to see, but people couldn't see them, and now they're seeing them. Like, it seems like every couple of days, but every couple of months, that new Sheilas are being found because the veil has been rent. It has fallen from our eyes, and the foggy mist of patriarchal toxicity, and now, there's so much revival and interest in the Sheilas now. More books are coming out, and it's so interesting to me that what was there in plain sight but couldn't be seen is being seen now.
I've tried to wrap my head around that. It was there in plain sight on the walls and nobody saw it?
They didn't notice them because they weren't tuned in. Some of them are smaller and maybe more obscure spots, but they've been there. The first Sheilas,
that's
for
amazing.
Centuries and centuries, 12th century, they first started. So that's a long time. So that they're just being discovered. So I feel like it's being tuned in, and all this vulva art. And commenting on the dinner party, I just wanted to say that in some ways, and this was from a curator of a national museum, saying that feminist art is one of the most transformative art movements in the latter half of the 20th century. All these great artists like Judy Chicago and Mary Beth Edelstein, so many people, Nancy Spiro, all these great artists said it was such a revolutionary art movement, and bringing in, as Faith Welding said, why are there so many vulvas in our work? Well, that's the way to express what needs to be expressed. And that it's such a transformative quality in art and all. I don't know if you saw that pink video by Janelle Monáe. It's fabulous. It's fabulous. Just such a a reclamation of her body, and it's very out there. I mean, some people I know, they don't like the word pussy, but I think it's wonderful.
Say it again. Tell us.
Some people don't. Huh?
Tell us again what artwork you're referring to. The pink.
Oh, it's called Pink with a Y. It's a video. It's on YouTube and stuff by the artist Janelle Monáe. She was.
Okay.
She's a singer and she's an actress. She was in that movie Hidden Figures. She has a whole video about pink, and she's, of course, pink is the intimate color of the vulva, and she's just reclaiming that. She has she has these vulva pants, and she separates her legs as if the vulva, an opening to the vulva. It's fantastic, and she has these women's butts gyrating, but she's claiming her sexuality. It's fantastic.
Yes, with no shame.
No shame. This just happened like in the last 2 weeks, so I bring that up. And,
that's wonderful.
Yeah. So I find that exciting, and then, like I said, coupled with my book, that there's a real foundational context. Even though I think it's in the spirit of the times, and women are channeling that, and I'm all for it. And then there's also the historical work that's there.
Yes. You have described the Sheila Gig as an antidote to the war on women and the war on nature. I don't know if you have anything to add along those lines, because I think you've pretty much said it. But I find that very intriguing to present it as the antidote to war on nature and war on women, and the war on the imagination.
Yeah, because those three things were certainly in my book. And again, the longest war is the war on women. That's the enduring war that, may it be so, that it is ending now. And, to this day, women are being burned as witches in different parts of, literally being burned as witches.
Yes.
So
yes, they are.
Because of her power, because of her wholeness, and because, of course, that the body of the goddess is nature, and that she is connected to nature, the connection of women's bodies and the goddess as all cosmos and nature. And again, as I was talking before, the power of the imagination and the power of that image. You don't have to even know a thing about a Sheila Gig. Put the image in front of you and contemplate it.
Mm.
That's all you need to do. And that will empower you. And take you somewhere, and maybe give you some delight, and maybe it's a juicy image.
Yes. Let it really open yourself to it, and your emotions, your feeling. Just open your awareness, and what's encoded there will wake up in your own body and consciousness.
Yes.
It did with you.
Yes.
Yeah.
You don't need anything else. I mean, of course, I'm a scholar and I'm interested in interpretations and all of that, but really, it's the image. It's the power of that image.
Yeah. Oh, Star, thank you so much for the work that you have done and this exquisite book. I'm encouraging everyone to get Sheila Gig, The Dark Goddess of Sacred Power, by Star Goode. And, people are going to be able to connect with you. We'll have the links up that in the text that accompanies this interview, and they'll be able to contact your work or you. And as we kind of come to, I don't know how close we are to the closing, because it depends on if what else you might want to share or say or express to the listeners about any of your work, or about the goddess, the return of the goddess, any or all of this. What would you like to say to our listeners?
I guess I would just want to say that there's a new spirit stirring in the consciousness of our time, and that women are reclaiming the vulva as an icon of primal creative energy, and it's unbounded by space or time, and that this sacred image is found in uncountable representations, from Paleolithic caves to Sheila Gigs to pink pussy hats, and that these are part of the potency of our time to sanctify the female body and to subvert patriarchal toxicity. And we're on our way. We're on our way.
We're on our way. It's the pivotal image, isn't it, to reclaim
Yes.
all of that?
Yes,
Yeah.
and again, the icon of the vulva, a basis of civilization. Let's build a new civilization, and we are around that as a foundational image.
Beautiful. I'm going to encourage people also to go to YouTube and look at your Goddess in Art series. It's just rich. The interviews are so rich.
Thank you. They can go to my website, stargoode.com, and they're all there too. So.
Great. Star Goode, that's S-T-A-R-R, that's 2 R's, G-O-O-D-E, stargoode.com. Wonderful.
Yep.
Thank you so much for being with us today.
Vajra, and for all the work you're doing.
I'm enjoying it. I get to speak like you did. See, I've got a platform now to be able to speak to all these wonderful women that I've known for a while, but not at this depth. It's just been an absolute delight. So
for me too.
Thank you. Thank you. We'll talk again soon.
Okie doke. Bye-bye.
All right. Bye.